this. All right, so just briefly for those of you who are new here, possibly Sinead, I don't know, I've not commented on your name before, introducing myself. So my name's Lucinda Carney. My background is many years in corporate learning and development, and there's at least one person on this call who's worked with me in that capacity. My day job is founder and CEO of Actus performance management software. That's a software which provides performance, learning management, 360 feedback. So we have a range of that sort of functionality, but we also offer training and consultancy. I host the HR Uprising podcast. So I notice a number of you are HR professionals. If you've not come across the HR Uprising podcast, you may well find we've got a back catalogue of 200 plus episodes. So if there's a topic that's a hot topic for you, you might find one of those that are of use to you. We've also got lots of webinar back catalogue on Actus. And following this call, often people ask for the slides. So we will provide you with PDF of the slides and links to the website if there's information that you want to refer back to, because we have got loads and loads of resources. In terms of the other areas, bits about me, I'm a mum of two, one daughter at university now. How old do I feel? Son doing A-levels, and I'm a keen but average netball and also tennis, but not. If it's on your holiday, that is commitment. Oh my word, I feel the pressure to try and make this extra value add. So in terms of the topics, very high level, what we're going to talk about today is what do we mean by talent, to get us thinking about that. A bit about talent management strategies, because there's loads of jargon regarding to talent. So a bit of a talent management jargon booster or blaster maybe. Talking about engaging, motivating talent, and career pathways, touching on how you might want to think about how you could give talent in your organisation, engage them. And also, if there's any other questions or anyone has, if there's anyone, thank you for all of you who've introduced yourselves, by the way. If any of you have specific questions that you want to pop in the chat, that are things that are interested to you, or questions as I go through the content, please do feel free to do so. I've always got my eye on the chat and I will try and jump in and answer them. And I try to keep the pace going because I know lots of time people are here in the lunch hour, so you don't have lots of time, so I'll keep moving. All right, so I mentioned already that this is Actus, which if you want to know more about Actus, do get in touch at any point and we'll give you the contact as to how you can get in touch if you want to know more about our software or our services. But let's crack on with the topic in hand. So we can all use the chat. Tell me in the chat, how would you define talent in your organisation? And I know this one takes a moment because it's a bit of a sentence. I'll give you a moment to type. Well, how would you define talent in your organisation? I have faith that they're going to pop up. I know people are having to type in sentences and it will come through in a moment. And while some of you are typing there, I'm actually going to go on to a second. So we're going to be multitasking here in the interest of time. And I'll come back to these definitions that you've come up with. I'm also going to pop a poll up. We don't. Peter, that's cheating. All right. But maybe it's real, unfortunately. In that let's have a look here. So I'm just checking. I own it with Peter. At least I define it as the staff. All right. So to make it easier as well, I've got a 3 option questionnaire. So I've put up here this comment that he's just put there. I don't know whether one of these options would work for him or not. Let me see whether I can put the poll up. Launch. Cool, I've got it all going on straight away, haven't we? This because you're trying to eat your sandwich with one hand. I'm asking you to respond to polls and chats at the same time. So at least saying that you're defining it as stuff. So that would probably be C here. So it's about everybody. Some organisations see it as talent as being a very a small group of people. So that might be the case there for some. I'm just going to turn my video off because I'm breaking up a bit and I have just to try that. hopefully that might improve things a little bit. So I'll let you keep on going with the poll while I'm hoping my hotspot will be able to improve the signal a little bit. Anyone else want to respond? Oh, 100% have answered. Okay, let's go for it. End poll. So that's interesting, actually. Let me share the results here. For me, this means we are quite a select group of people, that the view of talent is much broader than it used to be. So back on the day, which is admittedly far longer ago than I care to admit, the focus on talent was more about like an elite talent group. It was a bit elitist. Whereas here, most of you are saying it's everyone, it's about getting the best out of everybody, almost playing to people's talents. And others saying it might be different pockets of people based on key skills. It might be both, I suppose, in terms of those. Like that, Richard, everyone's good at something, and you're getting a thumbs up there. Talent's a varied bag. It's Mike, is it Mike Adnall? I recognise you, but I probably got it wrong. Depending on what the role is, some is high achievers, other doers. Absolutely, there's room for everyone, isn't it? It's about getting the best out of everyone. So that's our collective view here. It is, yay! I did a fist bump. You can't see me, Mike, because I just fist bump, but I've turned my video off. So we're all of the view that anyone can be talent here, and that's great. And I suppose maybe when I move on to this slide here, some of these don't respond to us. These are not issues for some of us. In the old school term of talent, when people used to talk about, you know, top talent would be a term that would be bandied around. I used to feel that was a bit of a concern, because well, I do think actually just feels a bit elitist. If only 5 or 10% of something is that, well, what do you do with the 90%, the majority? Whereas, as you guys are rightly saying in the chat, that everyone's good at something. So it's about making the most out of everybody. And we don't need loads of people who all do the same thing. We want broad, varied teams. The other thing I'd say is that I think that we find that talent to be quite situational. So somebody who's amazing, for example, in a crisis may not be the same person who is amazing in terms of really steady getting things done. If we think about completer finishers versus starters. So it's often about the right situation. So maybe that means we as organisations need to think about getting the right talent in the right place, or the right skills in the right place. So almost saying, actually, when we're rethinking talent management, we're saying this is about everybody. This is about getting it's about not thinking about something in an elitist way. It's about making sure that we understand what people's strengths are, what their aspirations are, and we do our best to give them the opportunity to live up to them, so that everyone lives their potential. That's satisfying for them, and it adds value to the organisation. I'm going to keep an idea on the chat. So Katie, if you can keep letting me know whether you can hear me clearly or not, that would be helpful. In terms of the other point here, talent doesn't automatically correlate with performance. I think that's an interesting angle too, because you need to make sure that people are well managed. You could have someone with amazing potential, but they don't necessarily deliver against it. And I also think that it can be risky, because organisations think that, let's say they've recruited top talent and they're going to come and do it all, but the world is changing so quickly, isn't it? That someone who is brilliant at something today may not be brilliant tomorrow. Someone might be really good at a set of skills, but their ability to learn or flex is different from someone else. So it's always moving, and anything that is sort of stuck in one place and overly defined as a specific square peg is probably not going to be the right fit for tomorrow. So it is something that's quite challenging there. Steve said, Steve saying talent, natural aptitude and inequality that emerges effortlessly, skill definition and acquired ability learned with effort. So that's interesting in terms of you're saying talent, as in talents, and skill, talent versus skill. So something you can do easily versus an acquired ability, Stephen. And I like that, because I think that also shows why you could see that someone who can do something naturally, you've only got to think of those kids at school who are amazingly bright but lazy, and they can end up being outperformed by those who are just good at applying themselves, developing skills. They are ultimately going to be more successful. So, and really not just focusing in on innate talent. We want to help people to learn, and maybe that's the key about talent management. It's making sure that everyone sees that they have the opportunity and the ability to learn new skills and understand what they are, and they're given the opportunity to do so. it's also one of those things where talent, like competence and engagement, is used as, is it a noun? I suppose it's being used in a different way as an HR jargon term, isn't it, than the actual the actual dictionary definition, as often the case with HR jargon. And talking of HR jargon, I'll just put some other talent management jargon up on the screen for you. So if you want to do some jargon busting, we'll send you a link to a succession planning dictionary, I think it was, that we've done, where we looked at lots of these terms. I did a wash up of them because, I mean, I've been in this industry 25, 30 years, and some of these I kind of think, oh, what are we talking about here? What does that really mean? Some of them are outdated. Some of them are really relevant. But all of these things fit very much with talent management. But I think if you look at it again in this context of rethinking talent management, for me, talent management is almost about grabbing those people with the skills or the talents, seeing it as a static thing. And it's potentially, we're seeing it as static, but it's potentially, I don't know, moving it around, it's managing it. Whereas our rethinking aspect of it, lots and lots of these terms here are, I'm going to start my video again because I feel like I'm not able to express myself. You're not seeing my gestures. That lots of these terms here are really about learning. They're about development. So learning and development, training needs analysis. It might be understanding someone's technical competencies, their behavioural competencies, thinking how those can be developed. So it's less management, isn't it? It's about talent development. Is it really any different from learning and growth overall, having a learning strategy? So for me, lots of these things fit together. Some things like 9-box grids would be classic. That's if you were going, if I was classically thinking what would fit in talent management old school, would be this 9-box grid where you have performance versus potential. Now that's an interesting one. So those people in the top right-hand corner might be seen as your top talent in the old days. I think it was McKinsey that originally came up with this. Now some people love this. Fewer and fewer do, honestly. Some people hate it, but there's so many holes you can pick in it in terms of how do we know what potential really is? How do I, as a manager, know what someone's potential is? Because it goes back to my motivation to learn or my inclination to learn. But then again, how do you, if you don't segment people, work out what development to give them? And I suppose that is probably quite a philosophical discussion, that as we move forwards with things like AI and better ways in which we can assess people's knowledge, where we've come from, this sort of talent 9-box grid has been very much about identifying people about where they are right now in terms of maybe historic performance and competence. And potentially, if we could be more fluid about this, then we're likely to get more out of people and match their expectations. So I think it's an exciting place to be. And some of these things do still have a place for the future in terms of where we go with talent and getting the best out of it. Now, some of you on this call may have to build a talent management strategy or something similar. Do let us know, have you got to do that, or have you done a talent management strategy? I know someone in the chat, was it Peter, said that talent isn't something that figures in the organisation you're with at the moment. Is this something that you might want to do? Let me know in the chat if this is something that's on your mind that you're hoping to do going forwards. And let's assume that you do, or you might want to, you're considering it at the moment. So if you are looking to develop a talent management strategy, we're going to briefly think about how you might do that and what you might want to do. I'll just check it, just have a quick read. Interesting. So Carol's unpicking something started by a consultant and you're trying to identify the why. And that's interesting because ideally you'd hope that the why would have been the first thing you'd seen, Carol, right? Terminology seems to require continued progression, not all hunted. Yeah, I think that's a fascinating one, Mike, isn't it? Because I've often seen that where what you really need to do is it's not always about climbing the ladder, and often it's very much about ladder climbing. So you could have people who are really top performers and they're happy where they are, but there are ways in which you can keep them energized. When I think back to my role in-house, one of the things was, if you've got people, if you go, oh, well, they're going to retire in the next 3 to 5 years, how awful is that? So they're not going to want to do anything. But actually, those sort of people, you could really tap into their talent for them transferring knowledge, acting as mentors. It's just about and they still wanted to contribute. So it's not, you're right, we don't want it to be just about progression, but it's about, maybe it's not the word progression, is it? It is development or contribution, maybe, and variety. Sometimes you just want to learn something different. A sideways move would be great. A new project would be great. Now, for me, this talent management strategy, interesting that Carol's saying that she's looking at something and it's not clear what the why is. For me, you actually absolutely do need to understand what the why is in pretty much any strategy you do anywhere, I'd say, but certainly in HR or OD. Why are we doing it? What is the purpose? I mean, if I was talking to you about how to design a performance management process, I'd ask you, what's the purpose? Because it's quite a different style if the purpose is engagement versus talent management or remuneration, for example. So understanding why, what is the purpose, is a really good starting place. And exactly. So that's the point, Harriet, isn't it? So how do we do this, add value to the business? If you don't know why you're doing it, then we're not aligned with the business, and then we become detached. And then actually any investment isn't relevant. People don't understand the value of it, and any things are just not going to have the legs that you want them to have. So potential drivers for a talent strategy, ones that I've seen before, and you might have one of these, or you might have none of them. Or something completely different. I should have gone A, B, C, D, E, F. Please pretend that I have. A, B, C. Actually, you can't see, I'm on the wrong one on the top. A, B, C, D, E, F. Pop in the chat which of those you think, if you were to reflect on your organisation, would be most relevant. So I'll run through them as you think about it for your organisation. Maybe you are suffering loss of key skills. So what you want to do is make sure that those people, those key skills, want to stay. On the other hand, then the marketplace is changing. So people need to learn those new skills faster. So what you want to do is do internal development of those skills. So it's more of a growth. So it's a training. So there's retention is something which would be slightly different. How do you give that carrot so people don't want to leave? Development is more, it's obviously going to be more development focused because you want to grow people within the organisation, and so measure their existing skills and work out how to take them to the next level relevant to the business need. Engagement or motivation, well, maybe you're going to use development or career progression as a stick, if you like, as a carrot for people to see that they are progressing through the organisation, so they can see that if by 3 years' time they will be senior XYZ, so they get a status boost or something like that that motivates them. Employer brand is quite important for attracting people to come to an organisation. Again, increasingly people are expecting good quality talent processes in an organisation, so attracting people, being seen to show that you've got great development and career pathways. Cultural aspirations, that might be about ensuring you've got a more diverse senior leadership team. You might have analysed that actually you want to develop your gender or other elements of diversity. So you might have cultural aspirations to make sure that people are not disadvantaged, or to support specific cultural groups. And also profitability and productivity, which can be outcomes of all of these, but that might be about making sure that talent is rewarded in a certain way for performance. So those are just examples of things. You might have multiple, and I can see some of you have gone for a number of those, where it depends where you see the flow. Some do flow through and some don't, but the key is, what do you want to prioritise? Because you can't do everything at once. And that's quite tricky, you know. So often you might feel, I can't boil the ocean is a great expression. You can't achieve everything in one hit. So what's the priority? And if you are clear on that priority, get that agreed, presumably, because this is a strategy. So you're going to be sharing it with the board and communicating it more widely. Then you help people understand, yes, this is all about engagement, motivation, for argument's sake, or internal development. Therefore, the priority focus is going to be on X, Y, Z. It helps you be really clear about what it is you're doing. So let's say you've identified your why, and you may have additional or different whys to this, and that should be ideally at the start of your strategy. What do you do then in terms of the questions? These can be questions that would help you think clearly about it. And it may be that you don't just do it yourself. You go and talk to key stakeholders in the business to make sure that this is something that's consistent with what the business needs. So I might ask about, are there any roles or positions that are essential to business survival or delivering the business strategy? So that could prioritise certain roles in terms of retention or development. So that might help you to work out where to start. The same thing could be, are there certain roles that require specialist knowledge or skills that are difficult or expensive to recruit into or to replace? And third one is, are there any key individuals in the business with key knowledge or experience that would be equally hard to replace? So that's where, if you're looking at certain key roles, which would be business critical, so it's almost a performance issue if you don't have those. If you're looking at something more generally in the organisation, going actually, how do we, let's say you don't have a specific gap in certain roles, none of those are particular risk areas, and your driver is engagement, then you might want to look at, culturally, what drives engagement in our organisation. Is it more of a performance-led culture, or is it about development aspirations? If you do engagement surveys, what areas do people commonly score highly or score low? So you might identify that these are areas that we need to enhance in terms of this. And this is where it becomes, is it a talent strategy? Is it an OD strategy? Is it an engagement strategy? Doesn't massively matter. But the point is looking at the data points and working out what is it you're trying to develop or change. So once you've identified why you're doing things, so what's your overall purpose? And obviously it's aligned with the business strategy. Have you got any key pain points in terms of roles? Let's have a look at Harriet saying, is it roles or new skills for an emerging context that challenges culture? I think that Harriet, I think, is a really good one. So this one that's up on here as an example is more narrow, isn't it, in terms of roles? Whereas actually what you're talking about there, you could go, actually, we need to develop leadership talent. Or, as you're saying, we've identified that in this context, we require greater innovation, which is more of a broad competence. So you might want to find ways of measuring people's capability. As you've gone the example of innovation, think about how could we do that? Are there certain roles that need it? Is it something we want to improve across the board? So you could use things like tools like surveys or 360 feedback or competencies to evaluate people's skills there. And I'm saying evaluate them first before you then put your training or development in place. So that's another way. So what you're talking about there, great, is great because that's kind of across the organisation, whereas these ones here are more narrow, cutting down. And you can have multiple, don't get me wrong, it's what does the business need, but what you do need to do is prioritise, because you can't do everything at once. So you've assessed your priorities, you've come up with your plan, and this is very simply a 5-step approach. It's very common sense, but just thinking about this, what does our business need, which is what we were doing on the slide before last. Then we're thinking about how can we address this in terms of short, medium and long term. So first of all, we might want to identify what the gap is. Then we might want to put in some evaluation of the differences between different areas. Then we might want to put some training in place. We might want to put some coaching in place. We might put some other growth areas in place. We might do some metrics or recognition against these new skills. So you can think of various things that you could implement that might address those skill gaps or risk areas. As you put those in place, you could also develop progression, and I'll look at a career pathway that might be something that you could put in, which helps build this into more of a progression, although I accept it doesn't always have to be progression. And the main thing is making sure that you assess it over time. The reality is a talent or succession management strategy isn't something that's going to work overnight. It's a longer term burn, and that's why it is quite important to get it clear, to agree the strategic element of it, to align clearly with that. And when you implement, evaluate it every sort of 3 to 6 months. And you can absolutely tweak it if it's not working, or if the business strategy changes. So you can change your priorities, but I think the key is to do it in a measured way, where you absolutely know what those priorities are and you're being really clear about what you're doing, as opposed to having lots of stuff going on and no one really knows how it all fits together. So try to keep it linked, keep it clear, and keep it focused, and then evaluate and say, if that's working, that's not working, you know, we run a pilot on that, or next we're going to focus on this skill area. So just being quite measured about how you roll it out. So if you are thinking about designing then a career progression pathway, which is something that can move on in terms of talent management or a talent strategy. So particularly if you're a smaller organization, it can feel harder to do that. So I worked for big blue chips, so it was quite easy to have, let's say, a project management career pathway, so that you're a project manager, you could see what you needed to do to climb the project management ladder. But you can build these in other ways. And that is important for some people if they want to do progression, if you want to retain people because they want to see where their next move is. So if you're thinking about doing something like that, these are the sort of aspects that I would recommend you think through first. So first of all, managing expectations with people in terms of, you know, it's not, everyone's not going to get to the top. It's a classic thing of where you bring in, you have lovely graduate schemes and they go in these lovely progressions, and then they come into a normal job and they go, well, where do I go now? I'm used to changing every 6 months and having something new and exciting. And now I'm stuck in this role and I don't know where I go next. So it can be quite quite tricky, because almost you create a monster. The better a job you do, the more people expect as to where they go. Another thing to consider is, will you have multiple pathways? Because often it's certain areas. I mentioned project managers. So the business I used to work for, they invested in what they considered to be the key roles, of which, of course, HR and learning and development were not considered to be key. So things like finance and project management, and to a certain extent sales, they all had progression, more motivational for those. What's the impact if you do it for one area and not for another? The other thing is, think about the skills of managers. One of the things that we did put in place was put in place a kind of clear definition and progression for the skills of a line manager, because that makes a huge difference to how motivated your talent, wherever it is. It all comes down to how well they are managed by their line manager in the first place. Thinking about the pathway, what's the purpose of it again? Is it about promoting people, i.e. status, increased reward potentially, or is it about development? It can be quite, if you haven't got lots of ways of giving people reward, it can be quite a good way of creating artificial status. You know, in a small business, you can put in, you know, junior roles, and you identify, as long as you're prepared to identify what people need to do to climb that ladder, which may be as simple as just a title change, you're still giving them that sense of progression. So it's not to be overlooked. Thinking about the entry criteria, is it performance, is it competence, is it development, is it relevant experience? In terms of things like development for assessment centres or coaching or things like that, is it self-selection or is it nominated by others? That's an interesting one. It's often the usual suspects that get the nominations. If someone self-selects, does that mean they're more motivated? Again, you know your culture, but both of them have, there's an impact, it's an interesting dilemma. And of course, all of these, have you actually got the resource? If you are just an HR department of one, what can you do that's realistic and achievable within your remit, bearing in mind that, you know, this could be a full-time job for numerous people, and you've probably got loads of reactive HR stuff that you've got to handle along the way. So those are things to think about. And I can see there's loads of chats that's come through here. Let me have a quick look here. So if there's anything, that's it. Yeah, totally agree, Claire. It's a long-term investment, and it often conflicts with businesses that the business changes direction. Tricky. Okay, so Elise, that looks like that Elise, what you're saying is you have a business case, because it must cost the business money for you to have leavers. So if those manual roles, maybe obviously that's based on just that little paragraph there, that's an area to start. What could you put in place simply that would give a sense of progression for people in a manual role? Steve, it was good, wasn't it? Steve remembers us doing something before. Progression. Yeah, agreed, Mike. You've got to do it right. Short-term wins. So that's about not making it all too big and unwieldy. So little short-term wins and an iterative progression. building trust, which also means you can tweak. So that's the 5-step process, really. The short-term wins, get to 5, check it's all right, tweak, and then go round and circuit again. So it's not doing too much too quickly. Okay, yeah, strategy. And these are all things you learn with your culture, Harriet. I guess you all know your own organisations, and it's about engaging with them and maybe even playing back some of the challenges. They can be really simplistic about, yeah, I want to put this person on, but then they choose people for political reasons, and that has a negative knock on to others. There's loads of stuff, as we all know, that which can actually work against something that's really positive. So that's one thing I'd learned in terms of putting people on something, being very clear about what are the rules of engagement, clarity about it. Is it, ideally, I think, self-selection, supported by a line manager, right? But it shouldn't just be nomination, in my opinion, because I think that can often be discriminatory against people who could be really great. But that's my biased view. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I know that many of you will be under time constraints. This is an example of something that I did in an organisation. I thought I'd share all of the slides. That this is going back a while. This book you can still get, and I thought it was a really, really useful book. It was called The Leadership Pipeline by Sharon Drotter and Noel. And what we did was put in place a leadership pipeline for managers. Because the manager role is so critical for engagement. So often we focus in on those technical roles, but actually your line managers, they affect the whole organisation. And so what we've started by doing is really almost reclaiming the role of being a people manager as a professional role, that rather than something you do in addition to your day job. You know, I'm a great project manager, and I happen to have a team of 8. Is actually, you know, a key part of my role. If I've got a team of 8, then I am seriously a team leader, cost centre manager. I've got lots of responsibility. So what this was doing was defining what the main purpose of the role was, depended on the seniority. Now, this is obviously quite a large organisation because it's got 5 steps. Maybe 3 steps would be quite common in a smaller organisation, and therefore you'd get more of a merging between, say, some of the responsibilities here would merge more together and maybe here. But the point really was, and if you look at this book, is that they say in the leadership pipeline is that the problem is if people don't let go of some of the responsibilities of, as you move to being a team leader, if you have still just purely got sole contributor hat on, you're not going to manage people. You're going to see managing people as a distraction, and you're not going to do as good a job, which means that's going to impact engagement. Similarly, if you are supposed to be more strategic and you're jumping in to talk to customers or to deal with a real micromanagement aspect, then what you're doing is you are disempowering people further down the leadership pipeline. You can start to create blockers. So this is all about helping people understand what skills they should be prioritising, dependent on where they were in the seniority of that leadership pipeline. And then we looked at doing the equivalent for specialists. So whatever that specialist might be. So I mentioned, you know, technical role. It could be, you know, I've got project manager's brain, financial controller. You know, it could be a developer, software developer. So whatever that specialist is, you might want to create, you know, an artificial set of roles, and this could work in a small business. So you can come up with a title. You might give a little bit of competencies, so you'd understand what their skills and competencies need to be, so you can develop people, measure people in line with those, and you might give them some reward. Maybe they get more holiday or a different salary or bonus, whatever it might be that you're able to allocate to give that sense of seniority and progression and status. And remember, people coming in, particularly at the start of their career, that increase in status is really quite important to them. So even though it might be relatively, I don't know, manufactured, it still works, a specialist career path. The other thing I quite like about this is that quite often you find that people end up being managers in organisations when they really should never be managing people. They don't possess the people gene. And if you have specialist career pathways, you can give them the opportunity to progress status, retain their talents, but not inflict them on other people as people managers. I know that's quite hard language, but I'm sure lots of you are HR people out there, you know what I'm talking about. And then just going back to the management approach here, what we did with the leadership piece was we aligned in development for people as they went up the road. And this happened to be, we'd do an assessment centre to see if they were suitable or what their gaps were here. And then we'd put them through a training course at this level. And as you became more senior, it would be more customised development and learning. So it all worked together more appropriate to the needs. And now with the sort of things we can do in terms of learning, it can be so much more blended. It can be so much more flexible. I think there's much more you can do that we could do then. So on to my final slide, and conscious of time. So if anyone's got any final comment, oh, hang on, I missed my summary slide. Did I skip over it? Here we go. Any final comments or questions, just drop them in the chat, and I'll wrap up in the next 2-3 minutes. So do feel free to chat or ask questions, and I'll aim to address them. But the key takeaways is I'm saying term talent is context specific, can be loaded. That's why we're rethinking it, aren't we? Is it really a relevant topic now? Everyone's talent. In terms of a talent strategy or an OD strategy, do think about the why in line with business strategy and make sure everything is kept aligned. We talked about prioritization. You do need to prioritize possibly key roles or key skills and make sure it aligns with that purpose to start with. As said by Mike, it was like short-term wins. Go for those short-term wins and then loop back round so that you can reflect on those short-term wins and then tweak it or progress it. If the business kind of goes off on a tangent, often that will come back round. So try not to always flow with the business if it's really being very, very flighty. That's not maybe the right word, but ultimately take it step by step and assess impact as you go. If you're impacting people's skills positively, they want to stay with the business positively. So retention, you're not going to go far wrong in terms of those. It's just that aligning it with the business strategy is where we should definitely start. When you're doing it, make sure that you communicate it clearly and people understand the processes. So is it the selection process that comes in, or what are the structures that you put in place? Make sure it's very clear and defined. And there's always way more questions that people will ask than you think they're going to. So where as much as possible, get people to ask you those difficult questions in advance, put it in front of a difficult audience, say, what are the questions I haven't asked? So you've had chance to have those FAQs up front. And remember, strategies take years, not weeks to embed. So be prepared to follow through. It's a long game. Take it step by step and have confidence in the fact it's the right thing to do for the people in terms of that. So thank you so much for joining today. We've got some future webinars over the next few months. We're doing one a month. Thank you, Harriet, for the feedback there. That's very kind. I'll pop my regular poll up, just if anyone wants us to follow up on anything, you know where we are anyway, so you can just get in touch in terms of that. But if I can work out how to open the poll, I'll pop the poll up if anyone wants us to follow up proactively. Other than sending out the information to you, we will do. You just pop your information in the final poll. So if you want to talk further, please do. Thank you for joining. I hope you don't get stormed, if there's such thing as being stormed upon. And thanks for joining me today.